Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Pageau.
The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Photo Finale, Media Clip, Advertech Inc., Got Photo, IQ, Photobook AI, the IPI Member Network, and MailPix. Hello and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Pageau, and today we are joined by Stan Freimuth, the chairman of Tracer Imaging. Stan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. Pleasure to be here.
Now, Stan has a long pedigree in the photo imaging industry, and that's one of the things we're going to start with is talking about where the imaging industry kind of got its start from Stan's viewpoint. Stan, you started at a company that has a long, storied history called Pako Corporation.
That's right, Gary. I began my graphic arts / photo career back in the early 80s when Pako, which was a Minneapolis-based company, was the world leader in high-speed, large lab photo finishing equipment and graphic arts film processing equipment, which of course is long gone, and dental x-ray equipment. Mm-hmm. They were this little public company, very small actually for a public company, but the biggest in their field.
Right.
And amazing company, amazing technology, way ahead of its time.
Now, well, I was going to ask you, let's put this in perspective. We were kind of chatting about this before we started recording about really the logistics of mass photo finishing is really an art that today is probably underappreciated.
Yeah. In the pre-mini lab days, the 1 hour photo days, everything came into these large labs and filmed by the hundreds of thousands of rolls of film, and they were all produced in continuous production on film processors, paper processors, sorting and packing equipment. If anybody still remembers Pako, you may remember something called the CP6000 paper processor or the Photo Packer.
Mm-hmm.
The Photo Packer was a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment even then, highly computerized. It could sort every order individually in record time. The whole thing was just very, very high tech, and of course, completely died when 1 hour photo came in.
So you took a highly mechanized, highly efficient, highly productive system, and it was supplanted by a relatively low volume, low efficiency, and higher cost piece of equipment. That's kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
It was a very different value proposition back then. So Stan, what was your role with Pako back then?
Well, I started off actually running all their European operations. They had six subsidiaries in Europe that were sales and service subsidiaries, basically. And I ran all of those, and our primary distributor for graphic arts equipment at that time was Agfa. So I actually had a very good and close relationship with Agfa way back when. But we sold our own Pako brand products too, and particularly on the photo side, it was all Pako brand. And then later I ran all of the international operations, and it was kind of my introduction to the graphic arts and the photo world. If you can imagine, by the way, I'll add one last thing. Pako, this company in Minnesota, had its own retail outlets, its own photo retail outlets.
I remember.
Could buy Pako-produced prints from their photo shops.
Right.
They eventually sold to Brown Photo.
Right. Which I think sold to Ritz at one point, or Wolf.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. So from there, you progressed, you moved on to another leading industry company, and that was?
Fuji Film.
Right.
In those days, it was still called Fuji. That was in late 1983. And at that time, Fuji was just getting its graphic arts products off the ground in the United States.
Right.
And they sold exclusively through a distributor in those days, a company called Roberts and Porter. And they decided they better do this on their own because they weren't getting anywhere. So when I joined Fuji, the entire graphic arts products division consisted of about 5 people, 2 product managers, a secretary, me, and a couple of Japanese technical staff. And that was it.
Right.
And so my job was to basically build this business for Fuji, which I proceeded to do with a lot of help from a lot of very talented people and some great products.
Yeah, and then they even, I mean, we're going to fast forward a bit, but they even branched out into making some product here, right, in Greenwood.
Well, this was actually, that's a very good point, because the biggest hurdle that we faced, well, we faced several, but one of the biggest was our products were all made in Japan back in those days. And we started selling printing plates, aluminum printing plates. So if you can imagine having to ship these things and keep the inventory right and be able to convince your customers that you weren't going to run them out of product, that was a mammoth task that we had to overcome. So the very first Fuji factory in the United States was a printing plate plant in Greenwood, South Carolina.
Right.
And it was my plant, essentially. I didn't run it, but it was for my organization. And that plant opened the floodgates, because following the success of that, Fuji added 6 or 7 more plants in Greenwood, South Carolina. You may have been down there, Gary.
Yes.
And they were making everything from videotape in those days to X-ray film to
magnetic media. There was single-use cameras, magnetic media. I was there when they opened up the color paper portion of the plant. They had a open house kind of event for the industry, and very impressive.
Yeah, the complex was just superb, and it did so much for our standing in the U.S. printing industry, because now we could take our customers to the factory. They could see that we had invested a lot of resources into making this for them, and it just went from strength to strength once we had done that.
And then I think, I'm not sure of the year, but when we, I think, first met, it was when you became responsible also for the photographic side of the business.
Yeah. So in 2000, I became the chief operating officer of Fuji Film USA, with the responsibility for all Fuji's US-based businesses except the medical business and Fuji Hun, the chemical side. I think actually the reason, or one of the reasons I was chosen for that role, was that the graphic arts industry had gone through the analog to digital transition in the previous 10 years. I mean, we had been, we went from using film to plates, computer to plate, and when we eliminated film, we'd gone from analog color proofing to digital color proofing. Everything was getting digitized within the printing industry, and I guess there was some kind of feeling that maybe my experience going through that in the graphic arts side would help on the photo imaging side, which was, of course, by far Fuji's most important business at that time.
Right. Well, and it's funny because if you still look at some of the printing industry, it's still, a lot of it is still analog, though. If you look at it, it's kind of ironic, but yes, there's a lot of digital printing happening, but there's still a lot of, web presses and things like that out there as well.
Yeah. Without getting in too technical though, but the transition of actually taking camera shots of film on film and transitioning that and burning it onto a printing plate, that was part of the transition going to digital. We didn't have to go through those steps to get to the plate. And yes, you're right though, but from that standpoint, the traditional offset printing technology is still there, with a lot of much more assistance from digitizing data and so on than back in those days. But yes.
So what were some of those early insights from the digital or analog to digital conversion that Fujifilm was grappling for at the time? Because I think in the early 2000s, no one really knew where it was going to go. I think everyone had a clue that digital was coming, but there was a lot of question as to whether digital was ever going to be good enough to print, whether digital cameras would ever be cheap enough for the average person. And of course, no one saw smartphones coming.
Right.
So let's go back into the Wayback Machine, and you're tasked with, hey, now you've been in graphic arts for a while. You've got some photographic heritage. Now help steer the ship towards this digital nirvana. At that point, did you start drinking heavily? Or
yes,
was
very. Yeah. Now, well, what was interesting in that era, in the early 2000s, it was still the tail end of, the big Fuji Kodak battles for market.
Oh yeah.
For an amateur film. So, there was an awful lot going on there that was very, very strategic and important from Fuji's standpoint, and obviously from Kodak's. And our strategy at the time was very heavily into partnering with many brick and mortar photo retailers with a combination of Frontier mini labs and color paper and chemistry deals.
Yep.
Which Kodak kind of backed off the mini lab program, and so that gave us a lot of impetus. So we even in those early days, we were still pushing very hard on the film side and the chemistry side and color paper. Color paper, of course, was never going to completely go away as long as people were printing something.
Right.
But,
well, and you also had the advanced photo system coming into play there around that time period. There was a lot of innovation actually happening in the film world back then. I remember, most people don't realize, one of the reasons why single-use cameras, which I believe Fujifilm still takes credit for inventing, is that because film was so forgiving, and because printing technology could account for relatively over and underexposed images, and you still get a great print, that made single-use cameras possible.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And actually, well, I shouldn't go into that, but one thing I always found very interesting in those early days, again in the film business, was that we started making single-use cameras here in Greenwood while our competitor was making them in China. And so we were able to claim we were a domestic manufacturer versus our competitor, who was no longer making them here. But that's a side note. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's just another example of sort of the sourcing discussions that are even happening still today with manufacturing.
Yeah.
So
the other thing is, though, I have to say that there's been all kinds of analysis done by many people a lot smarter than me about how did the traditional film companies miss the digital thing so badly. And of course, neither of us missed it. I mean, everybody was sort of coming. I mean, there was no chance it wasn't going to come. But the question was, were we set up to be competitive in those markets? And the fact is, no. At that time, neither Kodak nor Fuji were. That wasn't our primary business, and so we had to learn how to be competitive in those markets. And fortunately, the market just moved so fast that I don't think either company ever did very well in the digital camera business.
Well, that was one of the you kind of hit on one of my pet peeves is when you read these sort of looking back on digital photography articles or even YouTube videos of people, and they always say exactly that. They always say things like, Kodak dropped the ball or Fuji missed the boat, and it was like, well, no, not really. I mean, like you said, you guys were way in early from the get-go, from terms of core technology, in terms of processes, in terms of even products. I mean, it's, at one point Kodak had the top digital cameras in the marketplace, and Fuji's were always super competitive. You're always in the marketplace on that. And, obviously printing images on silver halide, media was an incredible innovation. But yeah, it's sort of interesting when people look back and they think, oh, if only Kodak had become a digital camera company. I don't know. But actually, that's one of the things that we should probably talk about is sort of from Fujifilm standpoint. They pivoted very successfully because they really focused on their chemical heritage. And so you have even graphic arts, they're still very, very competitive and have a big, big presence there.
Yeah. I mean, I have to hand it to what Fuji has done. I mean, not just because I worked there, but that was quite a long time ago now, by the way. But the way they took advantage of what they were good at and transitioned and pivoted into other industries was just remarkable. And one day that is going to be a Harvard Business School case study of how the company did what Fuji did. So today, I mean, Fuji is just continues to go from strength to strength in all these other related industries or not so related industries.
Sure.
And it still remains, again, I can't speak for Fuji anymore because I don't work there, but they're still a major factor in the graphic arts field. In fact, if not the top, they're one of the top manufacturers in the printing plate business. And in photo, as you know, the whole photo industry has changed so much. I mean, they're not printing billions of prints anymore, but they're still printing a lot of prints. But more importantly, they're printing on every conceivable thing known to man, no matter what it is.
And they're selling. They're one of the leaders in the luxury rangefinder category, which is another interesting twist.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great story, and I'm very proud of the time I spent there, and hopefully contributed a little something to.
So speaking of your time there, it came to a close in what year?
2007, I think.
Okay. And from there, what did you do?
Well, I initially started just doing. I wanted to do something different. Actually, I've always worked for, Fuji, but I was there for 23 years, and I thought it was time to try my hand at some other stuff. So I wanted to get involved with smaller companies, do some board work, and I did actually a lot of consulting for a lot of small companies initially.
Yep.
Including tracer imaging. And,
okay.
I can talk about that a little bit, how I got involved there.
Yep.
But while I was at Fuji, I was introduced to Steven Spiro, who is the founder and CEO of Tracer. And he showed me this amazing, quote, lenticular printing technology for consumer prints. And I was kind of interested in it, and I shared it with a lot of my Fuji colleagues, and we shared it with some of our retail customers. And we were hoping that we could get somebody to try to take this on as a customer. Yeah. We weren't very successful. But when I retired from Fuji, one of the companies that I was talking to after I left Fuji was Tracer, and they said, "Would you like to kind of help us?" And I said, "Yeah, I love your technology. I'm happy to help in any way I can." The net result was I ended up becoming the chairman of their board, and got fairly involved with them for a while. And I'll come back to what they do and how they do it in a moment. Yeah. But then I was on the board of several other companies, one of which was Presstek, right, on the graphic arts side, and Presstek's CEO, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Jacobson, who used to actually run Kodak Polychrome Graphics at one time, was the CEO, and he had an opportunity to leave and go to Xerox as a Xerox.
I remember that. Yeah, he just up until recently. I think he's in charge. Isn't he in charge of EFI right now?
Exactly. Yep. So Jeff and I had become friends over the course of time, and that was the reason I was invited to join their board. But when he got this opportunity to move to Xerox, the board asked me if I would step in and become the president, CEO, and chairman of Presstek. So I did, and I learned a lot about the printing press business, which at that time was not a very robust industry. With an industry consolidation, selling printing presses was not very easy. And after a couple of years, with the board's advice, I sold the company in a go private transaction to a private equity firm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I kind of came back. I was always chairman of the board of Tracer, but I came back and got more involved in the company again.
Right.
And so that's kind of my interim history.
So let's talk a little bit about, before we get into the deep dive into Tracer, a little bit about what we've talked about offline, about the sort of the intersection between graphics and photography. Because from a technology standpoint, the graphics industry had a completely different user base, customer base, workflow than photography, because photography just completely different process. But as digitization has come into play, they're merging together. What are you? Did you have any insights in that through your career? Did you kind of see it happening, or has this been a kind of surprise?
Well, it's certain things have been. It's not a surprise, but it's not something I actually noticed happening while it was happening. But I can remember when Benny Lander first introduced the Indigo's presses way back, and I can't even remember when that was, in the 90s. And we kind of, in the printing industry, at that time, kind of thought it was a bit of a joke. How could this possibly ever impact the high speed offset lithography printing that we were used to? And especially when in those early days, if you had an Indigo, you needed 3 of them so that you could always have one running, hopefully.
Right.
If you remember that. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But obviously, as they continued to refine the technology, and then as it moved on into HP's hands and so on, it's become a truly viable technology in short run, and maybe not so short run printing, commercial printing. So, and the same technology is available to and is used in professional labs and in other photo labs, and it's just the same equipment is there, and you can do the same things with it regardless of where you claim your space is.
Right.
So we've seen a lot of examples of that, where companies use that. I'm talking about photo companies, photo labs, trying to use that excess capacity in quieter times to do digital flyers and various products for commercial printing applications.
Yeah, commercial printing essentially. Yeah.
And it's there, it's real, and as things get tough and tighter for companies in both industries, you're always looking for things that are adjacent markets which are easy to get into without disturbing your core business.
Right.
So yeah, it's almost inevitable that there's going to be continuing consolidation or convergence in between the industries.
So let's talk now a little bit about Tracer. You mentioned lenticular imaging or lenticular prints. Can you kind of, without, obviously we're doing audio here, so you can't really show anything, but can you kind of describe what a lenticular print is?
Okay, so I guess there might be people there who have no idea what lenticular is.
Well, most people used to call them 3D prints, but I think lenticular print is the industry term.
Yes, it is, and lenticular effects, which are basically, for some people who might remember Clark Kent, the Superman rings and Cracker Jack boxes, that's lenticular. But the lenticular effects have been around for literally hundreds of years. I mean, artists back several hundred years ago were creating the illusion of depth or motion within an image. And that's essentially what this is. Basically, today, in modern day lenticular, you do this by printing on a clear plastic sheet, which is called a lens in our terminology. And that lens has tiny ridges and grooves on the viewing side, and on the back, on the print side, it's very smooth.
Right.
So those ridges or lenticules are engineered with a viewing angle and lens radius so that when a printed image is viewed through the lens, it creates an illusion of depth or motion. And the radius of the lens allows your eyes to focus on different views of the image on the printed surface. So that's kind of the technical explanation of what's going on.
Sure. But anybody who's walked through an airport has seen a lenticular image, basically.
Exactly.
Because there's a wide variety of point of purchase displays and other materials, other options that people have for using lenticular materials. Yes. Now, there's other companies doing lenticular printing, but I think Tracer has carved out a position in the industry as being one of the acknowledged leaders.
Yeah, I mean, Tracer, its initial roots were totally lenticular. That's when Steven Spiro founded the company, it was because he'd been consulting on a project that included Kodak, and he'd seen lenticular being developed at Kodak. And while Kodak used a completely different technology than those used today, the effect was stunning. And I've seen many of those images from what Kodak was doing.
It was amazing.
It was totally amazing. But the problem was that to achieve that quality of movement in an image was so expensive. I mean, the equipment required to do it was incredibly expensive, to the point where it just wasn't commercially viable. Nobody would have paid $20 or $30 for a 4x6 print, for example, that moved. Right. So Kodak basically stopped the development, and Steven picked it up in a different way. He found a company on the West Coast that was using a different technology, and gradually grew the business from there. The interesting thing was that West Coast company was primarily involved in commercial B2B kind of work, whereas what Steven envisioned was a consumer product, just like we were talking about, where consumers could create their own versions of lenticular, whether it was video, a couple of seconds of video on a card, or flips, 3 or 4 images on one card.
Yeah. Or even 3D.
And 3D, of course.
Because I remember when Fuji had a 3D camera, and I think they were offering 3D prints at the time.
Yes, they were.
Mm-hmm. Was that through Tracer, or was that through another vendor?
We offered them the opportunity to do it through Tracer. They did it themselves, actually.
Okay.
But it's an expensive process. 3D requires intervention. You can't just take an image and print it without doing something to it.
Right.
So it's an expensive option, but not expensive in the commercial space, because it's part of one of the things that we would do as a printer of lenticular.
Well, plus you're dealing with a commercial aspect, right? I mean, if you're going through the Las Vegas airport and you're doing this eye-catching display for your casino using lenticular, if you get enough people to look at that and treat them to show up, then whatever that cost you was worth it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, some of the research that has been done over the years shows that people's retention of a lenticular poster, for example, or an ad, is many times higher than for a traditional print. It's just, it catches your eye, you tend to remember it. It's not just that it catches your eye, you do tend to remember it. Mm-hmm. And that's why when it's done well, a lenticular point of purchase display tends to boost sales of that product, because as you're walking along and it's at eye level and you suddenly notice something changing as you go by it, you're drawn to the product.
Right. So right now, though, Tracer does have a consumer business where people are. What kind of images are being submitted for a consumer application? What kind of images are people supplying? Are they flips? Are they?
Yeah, right now, we do sell our consumer products on our own website. It's called tracerpics.com, actually, but we don't promote it. It's just there, it's available. But people can, through other retailers, they can order online, and we limit what they can do because we don't want to make the process too complicated to right now mostly 2 flips, maybe 3 flips, because you don't want people to take too long to create these things, or they'll get confused or fed up and stop. So make it simple as possible. And all they have to do actually is select the images and that they want to flip between each other, and they'll see what that's going to look like.
Right.
But we do have plans to offer some significant enhancements in the future for what people can do as consumers in terms of creating lenticular prints. And it's amazing when you see what some people do on their own. I mean, they're very creative.
Yeah, that was always back then when Kodak was pitching this, their version of it. I remember they were sending out sample images that they were like zooms, like you could zoom in on a section of the picture. And also they were saying it was up to 30 seconds of video was being captured, basically. It was like and so you could have a fairly interesting story within that thing. And that's one of the things I think for today's generation, if anyone ever can unlock that, the idea of capturing a video clip on a print, I think with today's short attention span video creators, I think would be an interesting product for them.
Oh, yes, indeed. In fact, for years we have felt that, and it's not 30 seconds. You can't do that, but you can certainly get 2 or 3 seconds of video, which is plenty, in terms of showing, child's baseball swing or scoring a goal in the soccer field or whatever. That can be done. But, we need to improve the quality. We're working on improving the quality so that it'll meet our standards. We want to do this. Video is really the ultimate goal. But it's got to be good. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. And it's still, still some work to be done to get it to the standards that we would like it to be at.
Well, there's no shortage of video content being created now. That's
Exactly. Yeah, amazing.
So tell me a little bit about your newest offering, the Express Solutions, which you've just announced.
Okay, well, thank you, because that's one thing I did want to talk about. The problem with for commercial customers, it's complicated to do lenticular well. They need hand-holding. They need us to help them, and to design with the right lens and the right effects. It's fairly complicated. So what we try to do with Express Solutions is to open this up to a much broader array of potential commercial customers, such as printers, artists, graphic designers, and brands themselves, who either have never tried it or who've heard that it's too expensive or too difficult for their design applications. So what we created here is a very simple builder, which is not dissimilar to a typical photo builder. If you're creating something online, they're very easy to use. You upload your images and you see previews. And so this way we eliminate, at the moment, we're making it very simple. We're eliminating all the upfront setup fees that are typical for having to create a really good quality lenticular image. And it's very quick and easy to do, and they can see it and order it without a lot of interaction from us. So if somebody wants to take a look at it, we have a lenticular dedicated website called tracerlenticular.com, all one
Okay.
word. And they can see how it works. It's very simple, and we're very excited about it because it's going to broaden the base for usage and applications of lenticular, we believe.
So the hand holding you said, what would be an example of the type of issue someone would have with a lenticular image that Express Solutions addresses?
Well, for example, I mean, we in the Express Solutions builder that we have there, you have to select how far away are you wanting this image to be viewed from,
Right.
because that makes a huge difference. If you're creating a big poster that's going to be seen from 12 feet away, it will use a different lens and have different attributes than something that's going to be looked at from 2 or 3 feet away or smaller in size. So all of those things are very simply placed there. So you can select as you go and create a really good image in the end.
Now, are there different pricing for that? If someone does it themselves, they get a bit of a price break on that. So is
Absolutely.
that going to encourage people to, like you said, maybe artists, maybe different people to be involved?
Exactly. That's what we are hoping for. That many people who were kind of inhibited by the pricing will find this much more cost effective. There's no setup fees. If you order 3 instead of 1, there's a price break and that kind of thing. So the more you order, the better the price.
So Stan, how big can you make a lenticular print?
Well, you can, for one single print size, we can go as large as 46 inches wide by 70 inches high.
Wow.
So it's pretty large. And then, of course, on top of that, you could tile them so you can create a much larger collage or wall. You can fill a complete wall if you're so inclined.
Wow. And the media can be shaped, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be square. It can be, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You certainly can cut it in any way you want. Yep.
Well, that's great. So looks to me like Tracer's becoming more user-friendly and trying to expand their markets these days.
Yes, absolutely. So, in the last 3 or 4 years, Tracer has actually broadened its business base to actually more into the photo side, in addition to the core lenticular business. And Tracer's now moved into the personalized wall decor space, having developed systems for retailers that are basically very cost effective, simple to make, high quality for the in-store production of personalized wall decor like canvas and metal prints.
Really?
Custom photo frames, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Huh.
It's become quite a large part of our business. And we actually have just launched a new product called Tile Pix, which is an 8x8 frame photo tile, but which differs from every other photo tile that's on the market right now because it has a very unique magnet-based wall mounting mechanism, a very simple and very, very good wall mounting mechanism.
But these aren't lenticular.
No, these are not lenticular, not at this time. This is just your own prints, but again, these are currently available at a major photo retailer in store for a same-day pickup. And this product was just launched probably a month ago.
So one of the things I was questioning was, where does Tracer do its production?
Well, we're in Ossining, New York. We have a relatively new facility. We moved in there 2 years ago. We do all our digital lenticular production there. We also do some of our fulfillment of ship-to-home products that we sell in the wall decor space there. We produce product there.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have, for very high volume lenticular, we have partners in the Midwest who actually will print for us with our people present, doing all the pre-press work and so on.
Okay.
So yeah, and then on the other side of the business, on the wall decor side, we do have manufacturing partners in the Midwest and in Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and Tennessee. So we have a lot of production going on throughout the United States.
Because that's really kind of a booming market right now. The whole wall decor space. I think people are really starting to exploit the advantages there, especially with not only ship to home but retail opportunities.
Yes, yeah, it's a nice business. We're glad we moved into it, and we think we have lots of opportunity to continue to expand there.
So we need to keep an eye on Tracer, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, well, we're developing some interesting new products, beyond what we have now. We hope to launch some really exciting photo apps in the near future, within the next few months. May have to ask you to do a release on those when we launch them.
So, well, that sounds interesting. So it sounds to me like the company is broadening its base and looking at the new markets and looking at new platforms. That sounds great.
Yeah, the company has done an amazing job, especially in this challenging time we're in right now with the COVID era. And we, like many companies, we actually make tracer shields, which we call, they're face shields that we call tracer shields, along with all our other products. So, we've done, I think, a heck of a job of keeping the company in shape and reinventing itself as things change.
Well, thank you, Stan, for your time, and look forward to catching up with you later.
Okay, Gary, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and it's nice to catch up with you again after so many years.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.